Hello, my name is Debbie Boone, and I want to welcome you to my podcast, The Bend, where we explore how successful people navigated the path and emerged in a better place when life threw them an unexpected twist. It's inspired by one of my favorite sayings: the bend in the road is not the end of the road unless you fail to make the curve. These conversations will hopefully help you and inspire you to embrace your personal bend and to flourish. I hope you enjoy it, and if you need help with your own personal navigation and you're in veterinary medicine, please feel free to reach out to me at Debbie Boone 2 Manage Vets Consulting. Enjoy the bend and be inspired by our wonderful guest. Welcome. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of The Bend. I am so excited to have my longtime friend, Dr. Cyndie Courtney, joining us today. Now, you might not know Cyndie as her title is the jerk researcher, and that is because she says she used to be a jerk. I don't really believe it. I've never seen her be a jerk in my whole life. Oddly enough, we met years and years and years ago online. And I don't know if Cyndie remembers this or not. We were both going into the CAPC talk, and we were talking to each other online through Twitter, I think, because it was new at that time, right? And we were learning,
especially in vet med. Yes,
that's right. And we were using Twitter for the first time, and then we met in that room and said we've been talking to each other for like 2 hours on Twitter, and then we met each other in a room face to face. She is the founder of the Jerk Researcher, and she studies workplace conflict, and that's her consultancy. She works to combine real-life experiences with evidence-based approaches that offer practical solutions to workplace conflict. She's a certified stakeholder-centered coaching and has additional training in nonviolent communication, conflict mediation, workplace well-being, and workplace violence prevention. She has been recognized as a future leader from AVMA, was WASAVA's 2019 Next Generation Award winner, and was Virginia, Maryland's 2021 Outstanding Recent Alumnus. She provides coaching, practice consulting, and conflict skills workshops to a variety of organizations in vet med. And she's just an awesome person, and I love talking to her about how people think and the emotion of work and conflict and all the things. So thanks, Cyndie, for coming on today.
Well, Deb, thank you so much for having me. I know we've been trying to make it work and make our schedules work for a while, so I'm glad I finally had some time to have us chat.
Exactly. I always like to have people tell their origin story. Were you one of those kids who always wanted to be a vet?
Actually, I was not. Interestingly, I always had an interest in medicine, and I was definitely one of those kids who always had pets growing up. But somehow I didn't quite put two and two together until I was a teenager. I actually started working at a pet store as a teenager because my mom was like, "You need something to do." And so I started applying for jobs locally and got hired on as a pet store sales associate. So I was one of those very frustrating teenagers who gave out way more advice than I was qualified to give. But I thought to myself, I really love this. I really enjoy it. Luckily, we had a registered veterinary technician who was the owner of our pet store. So pretty focused on the well-being of the animals there and making sure that we had good information to pass along to the pet owners there. But I thought, like, okay, what kind of job might I have where I could do this for the rest of my life? And started thinking about veterinary medicine. Luckily, he knew a practice manager, got me hooked up with a clinic, and the rest was kind of history. As soon as I started working in rooms, getting to know veterinarians, I was like, nope, this is amazing. I love this. How can I do this more? So that's how I got started in veterinary medicine, at least. But as I've come to learn, is our professions are always evolving, and we're always learning new things and finding new interests.
Yes. So I know the curveball now is, how did you get into this jerk research, and how did you ever have the epiphany that on occasion it was you that was the jerk? Because that takes some
Yeah.
self-awareness, right?
For sure, for sure. And I know you say you can't believe it, Debbie, but I will tell you, most people I've worked with have seen the jerk side of Cyndie at one time or another. So it was, there was definitely a moment when I was working at a pet store that, my manager, had some choice words with me. There was definitely a moment when I was a vet assistant where one of the client service representatives had to kind of talk me down and say, hey, when you're coming up front and telling the clients I'll be with them in just a minute and all of the phone lines are on hold and there are 5 people waiting for me, you're not setting me up for success. And then when I graduated as a veterinarian, despite the fact that I knew what, toxic leadership as a veterinarian looked like, I knew I did not want to do that. I still found myself falling into patterns of perfectionism and micromanaging my team. So at each step, I think I was lucky enough to have leadership that was invested in having me improve and and came to the table and wanted to improve myself as well. And by the time I got to being a veterinarian, I also had enough scientific background to say, hey, there's got to be some research on this stuff. Am I just stuck this way, or can we do this better? And that's how I really started becoming the jerk researcher and being able to help our profession as a whole.
Yeah, I love that because in a very similar path, I have always focused on like communication, client service because I'm growing up in the hospitality business. But I was doing some speaking at AHA and they gave me this book called Brain Rules. And that set me off, right? Dr. John Medina, Brain Rules. And I started reading about neuroscience and the functional MRI studies. And from then on, it was Katie bar the door, man. I was trying to figure out like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense about how people think and the way they react to things. And we were just laughing and talking about emotion being contagious and
Mm-hmm.
and setting that client up for either success or failure from the very first encounter that you have with them as a team member. And we don't tend to train people to do that well. In fact, sometimes it is veterinary tech. I mean, a receptionist week this week, even from my own life, even with all the experience I had, because my parents, like yours, were believers in child labor. Go to work, you need a job. I learned how to work with the public at a very young age, but even then, there were challenges, in handling the public. And in veterinary medicine, it's always typically a highly emotional state that
Mm-hmm.
people come into our practice, and until we learn how to be the cooler rather than to ramp them up, we're always going to struggle a little bit. How did events in your life kind of move you to create this service that you're offering to the profession?
Yeah. So it was definitely that feeling that, hey, is there something wrong with me? Am I flawed? Because I think at the time, a lot of the professional development or practice management talks discussing difficult people in practice really encouraged everyone to fire that difficult person as soon as possible, which is not necessarily always the wrong thing to do. The prognosis for a lot of those individuals is not always great. But when you find yourself as one of those individuals, then you ask yourself, like, oh, okay, am I just going to get blacklisted in this profession? And again, as I learned more and I learned there really were some evidence-based tools for doing better, and I talked with colleagues, I found that, God forbid, I wasn't the only one who had a technician start crying on me and wasn't quite sure what to do. So, and then the more people I helped, the more I learned, the more I realized that this wasn't just about kind of the emotional piece of it, that it ended up impacting our physical health in the profession. It ended up impacting the performance of the practice financially, and also it really ended up impacting patient care. So the more I did, the more I loved it, and the more I saw how much of an impact it could really have. And it ended up feeling like a calling. So the same thing where I'd felt flawed, where I felt like I was wrong or I was broken, ended up being a source of insight for me, where I could really look at those people that we kind of other or see as a problem and be able to give other folks kind of an inside view as to what might be going on with them and how they could reach them, or at least try to reach them.
Yeah, you mentioned perfectionism, which obviously runs
Mhm.
rampant in our world. And I guess it's the frustration when other people can't see it the way you see it,
Mhm.
and don't follow through the way you would follow through. And I feel that myself. Over time, you kind of learn to relax a little bit because other people have good ideas too, and you're not
Mhm.
always right. And that takes some self-awareness and some self-talk. How did you work through your own perfectionism and kind of, and then how do you share I really have to say it's the self-talk that when you catch yourself in the act, right? And you go, uh-oh, I'm doing it again, right? I need to stop.
Yeah.
I need to stop and apologize to somebody. And then, move on from there.
There was kind of a Jedi move I had a teacher use in middle school where he talked to me and he said, Cyndie, I noticed you're really defensive in class. And I realized there was no good answer to that. I mean, what do you say? Like, no, I'm not,
And be
right?
defensive. Yes.
Right? I'm not defensive. And so that, I think then when I got into the workforce and was talking with other people and they were giving me feedback, that was still stuck in my brain and still made me open to hearing and understanding what other people had to share with me so that I could hear that and try to improve. And I think just kind of cracking that door and seeing that opening and then seeing how things would get better. On top of that, seeing that there was a pattern. I think we can get into a mindset where we feel ashamed and we want to turn that blame around and put it on all the people around us. And I sometimes joke in my talks that I don't know about you, but I've never given somebody else a personality transplant effectively. It's really difficult to change other people. It's much easier to change
Yes.
ourselves, right?
Yes.
And so both admitting that, hey, I probably have a part to play in this. There definitely is a trend here. What is it that I can change in my own behavior to make the situation better? And then once I saw that I actually did have an impact, rather than being scary or seeing myself as flawed, it was really empowering to see that I could have that impact and that I could teach other people to have that impact as well. I definitely also picked up a couple concrete tools. I don't think that was there from the beginning. Some of it was just winging it. Some of it was just the humility of saying, I'm really frustrated. I know this is a problem I have. You shouldn't have to help me, but would you be willing to help me? And asking my team if they saw me starting to go to crazy town to just, pull me aside and to say, like, hey, are you okay? Or like, hey, you're being a little crazy right now. I talk about safe words. I've noticed a lot of practices that have healthy cultures have a way they've all agreed to kind of let each other know that
Mhm.
things are heading in a bad direction. And so they kind of de escalate the conflict before it gets out of control by having these safe words. And so, unbeknownst to us, we kind of created that. And so that not only helped it from getting out of control or prevented it from getting out of control, but then we started noticing patterns. So then we started noticing, oh, hey, we really seem to be stressed when these recheck appointments are scheduled improperly. What is it that we can do to make sure these recheck appointments get scheduled properly? And so we just created a new invoice item and we were able to customize that with the approximate amount it was going to cost and whether it was a brief recheck or a regular recheck and when exactly it should be. That was really, I think, the big moment for me was, or I guess a series of moments, being able to put down the defensiveness, seeing the benefit, being able to be humble and asking for help and it seeing the benefits of that. And then kind of the academic piece of it and seeing the academic side of what else I could do came later.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I followed a gentleman whose name is David Dibble, and he talks about from human side health, talks about systems in place, and a lot of times our great frustrations are not particularly with each other, but we're put into a system that is just really broken. And then we become frustrated because we can't get the work done that we want to get done because of these clunky systems. So when we start to look at what you were talking about is like, where's the pattern? And where
Mm-hmm.
can we break that pattern so that we put a better system in place? Well, the better system in place is like a real time space that says
Mm-hmm.
this takes this amount of time and this takes this amount of time. So you're not constantly running behind, which is, of course, very frustrating and then frustrates the clients. And then it starts to snowball from there. But I love that self-awareness piece of it. One of the favorite books that I always recommend people read, and I'm sure you probably are familiar with it, is the book called The Cost of Bad Behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And it is stunning to see the dollars and figures that come from this research from these two professors who were just studying bad behavior in businesses where if you are constantly the doctor that is blowing up and causing your technicians to cry and you look around and there's nobody popping over there to help you when you're looking for help, there's a reason for that because of avoidance. I mean, the people who you have flamed are going to run for the hills whenever you turn around and look. So that patient care, that efficiency, your ability to do your job is all being affected by these behaviors that you really don't want to manifest. Nobody wants to be that, right? So I love the fact that you've done this research and that you're actually helping people move through this space into a better place and that realization of what it takes. So how do people reach out to you and do you typically, I know you do a lot of speaking because we've done speaker circuit stuff together at AVMA particularly,
Mhm.
but are you finding that there are individuals who are going, Cyndie, I need an intervention?
For sure, for sure. So yes, there are definitely folks who find me through kind of speaking engagements, both through big and small organizations. But yeah, no, I definitely have folks reach out to me individually. I have an easy way for folks to contact me and set up meetings on my website. And so we often will do kind of an initial talk where I'll talk through, kind of almost take a history and figure out what's going on with their organization. And then we talk about what might be some things that would be helpful for them, whether or not those are things that I can offer or kind of resources outside of what I can offer. And then we put together a proposal if there are things that I can be helpful with. But I absolutely adore working with clients. One of the things that I find, and I wonder if you find it in your experience as well, Deb, is that, managing people is not necessarily always the reason people have gotten into practice ownership. And so I love when I can be that support for people to help make that part of it easier.
Mhm.
So if they're wanting to avoid conflict, I love doing conflict coaching where I can help them think through the challenge that they're having, think through how they can address that problem, be the person that follows up with them so they follow through on, having those discussions, giving them hands-on tools and resources so that they can have those discussions. I just find it so delightful, and seeing people say, oh gosh, that makes so much sense. That's definitely how I want to address it. And in those situations where we can keep somebody in the organization that the organization thinks is really valuable, but also make that organization a culturally healthier place for everybody else so that we can put boundaries on that person's behavior. It's really rewarding work to do. If I may touch on what you mentioned with the cost of bad behavior, also one of my favorite books, Christine Porath is like one of my favorite
Oh, yes.
individuals of all
You've got a
time.
great TED talk. If you guys want to listen
Oh
to a
my
great
gosh.
TED talk,
Highly
absolutely.
recommend. She's got 3 books out now. So Cost of Bad Behavior, Mastering Civility is a great one for leaders if you want to help build that in your organization. I have not read Mastering Community yet, which I think is her most recent one, but that's definitely on my to read list. Um, but I actually have done some exercises where we've sat down with practice owners and taken some of those numbers and had them, spitball and estimate and figure out, hey, what do we think this would cost in, say, like $1 million practice? And I have not had a single group that I've worked with come up with an estimate that's less than 6 figures,
Yeah.
especially in terms of the lost productivity. And what's really interesting is if you then look at the Gallup numbers on engagement, so we know that toxicity decreases engagement, causes disengagement. And then when you look at the Gallup numbers on engaged workplaces, usually the estimates we're coming up with for kind of opportunity cost, lost revenue, lost productivity are then when we look at the engagement numbers. Yes, those engaged workplaces have the exact opposite. We're seeing, like those 20% increases in productivity and profitability and things
Mhm.
like that. I would love if anybody wants to help us do the study, Deb, maybe we should get together and do the study.
Yeah.
But I would love to find a way to do a perspective study where we looked at, hey, what happens if we do have that bad actor in the practice and we either do nothing or we have some kind of intervention, and what happens to the revenues or the profitability of that practice.
Mhm.
I have so much anecdotal evidence from so many organizations, Deb, I'm sure you do too,
Yeah.
where, there was Fritz Wood was talking once about how he looked at the numbers of a practice and he was like, oh my gosh, what did you do this year? You guys made so much more money this year. And they hadn't done anything except letting go of the bad team member.
That one
I have
person. That's right.
Right. I have not met a single practice that has regretted financially letting go of somebody they thought was a star employee. And I've talked with several people who sometimes have done coaching for themselves to change their own bad behavior, and they've seen profitability increases in their
Mhm.
organization. So
Yeah.
all anecdotal stuff, unfortunately, but it does correlate with what we'd expect to
Oh,
see.
absolutely.
So,
Well,
yeah.
from my own personal experience, I went to work for a very large practice as the hospital administrator, and I inherited an experienced technician, and she considered herself untouchable, but she also
Yeah.
was gaslighting other technicians. She was, uh, I caught her balancing her own checkbook on my time.
Oh,
And
goodness.
just, I mean, but she really considered herself untouchable. When I let her go to go bother other people, it was amazing. It was a veil lifted, and you could walk into the treatment room. You could cross the threshold when she was there and feel the tension in the room. And
Hmm.
the day I let her go, the cloud disappeared and the
Right.
team started to relax because there is a tension there when you're always afraid that you're the mouse and the cat's going to pounce on you. Your
Yeah.
limbic system is so tense that you can neither learn nor work effectively. When we realize what we're doing to people, it's almost like the same scenario as being an abused spouse,
Hmm.
that they're constantly waiting for the shoe to drop. Even if it's
Yeah.
they go along and everybody's nice for days, but the past behavior is still lingering in their psyche, and they're waiting for the nastiness to come out, and they can't relax in order to learn. And this is something that we spend a lot of time and effort in some practices working on training, setting up training scenarios, investing in outside companies to come in and do training.
Hmm.
But when we're not just doing a simple thing like letting people feel like they're in a relaxed atmosphere where they can learn and grow and they're supported in their workplace, all that
Yeah.
is wasted money. Yeah, completely wasted money.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So
And
looking, yeah,
if
go.
I may, Deb, if there's one thing that I wish more veterinary practices and veterinary team members knew, it's that conflict management isn't just something you're either good at or bad at. That, like so many of these other communication and social skills, that this is something that we understand, that there are a set of ways to approach conflict that make it much, much easier to deal with. And that's where I just really love doing this work, is because it can seem so vague, but there's really like mechanics behind it. There's a science behind it. There's psychology behind it. And just like you said when you were learning about neurobiology, I love helping people see that, especially because so many of the skills that we use every day with our animal patients really lend themselves well to conflict
Yes.
management, whether that's reading nonverbal body language, whether that's, oh, hey, we want to use that fear-free approach of de-escalating and taking a step back from
Mhm.
that conflict, whether or not that's, being able to understand, to take a history, to use open-ended questions and to really be curious and not jump to conclusions, to not come to a diagnosis before we really have the full story. And so that's one of my favorite things to do, is to really just help teams recognize how they can apply the skills they already have to this skill set that can be so helpful to them every day, especially in practice, but also in the rest of their lives.
Absolutely. I've taught hundreds of veterinarians and team members over my career, and one of my very favorite things to do is to parallel their fear-free training and think about limbic brain responses that they've learned about in animal care, and say, okay, let's just move it over to the animal at the top of the food chain, because we are still reacting that very same way when
Mhm.
we push people too far, when we stress them too far. They either shut down or turn, and we can't say that we blame them because we pushed them that far. But now the other part of this story too, and I do tell people this, is sometimes people can come into a practice with trauma from other places,
Mhm.
and we did not cause their trauma, and we don't have an environment that is trauma inducing. However, their history, their baggage is coming with them, and
Mhm.
sometimes we have to see that and recognize that, and either try to help and help them see that this is a safe place, Or we might have to protect our team and say, this was a bad hire and I need to let this person go because they're never going to trust completely what we have here. And that happens, and that's okay. You just, I feel like building a great culture in a hospital is very much like baking a cake, and you have to have the right ingredients and in the right order, and the quality of those ingredients has to be good in order to get a finished product that is excellent. And if you throw, salt in the mix instead of sugar, you're going to have a big failure. So you've got to make sure that you are asking the right questions, that you are protective of a great culture. I mean, it is so easy for a great culture to go downhill fast
Mhm.
without protection. And it's something I learned over years of time, because you're right, you do have these superstar who have just fantastic skills, but they are hard on others. They are gaslighting others. They are not willing to teach others. And for me, I've always liked to hire people who like to share their knowledge and to teach clients and to teach each other skill
Mhm.
sets. And that really made for a great environment to work in. And I always like to teach. I'm sure you do too. But when
Mhm.
you have people who hoard knowledge, that's another problem. That was my
Mhm.
problem child. She was incredibly knowledge, but she
Mhm.
was so afraid that if she if she taught anybody else those skills, that she wouldn't be the golden child, the
Yeah.
valuable one. And
Yeah.
that's not the way to look at work, because,
Yeah.
there's always somebody smarter in the room, especially in this profession. We've got freaking geniuses all over the place. So you will never be the smartest person in the room, depending on what you're there for, right?
Right, right.
Yeah, depending on what you're there for. So I've just kind of learned to live with that throughout my career, is that I'm never going to be the smartest person in the room. I'm going to embrace the other people.
And you're making me think too of like those early days when I was an early career veterinarian. And, I thought, hey, I have all of these skills. I'm the doctor. When it came to certain things, I did think, hey, I'm the smartest person in the room. And, in those early years, I was really grateful to put some of that down and to have some humility and to learn from an amazing technician who also worked at the local emergency room about, hey, you take 2 breaths when that emergency comes in the door, and those 2 breaths aren't going to harm your patient, but they're going to do a whole heck of a lot of good for the clarity of mind that you're going to be able to bring to that case. And so, when we are able to put down that idea of basically in some ways putting down our shame, right? Like putting down the worry that we're going to make a fool of ourselves. And that's really when we have the opportunity to grow and get better and collaborate and learn from other people and to also not have to do it all ourselves. Like what a burden to feel like I love sharing the other conflict work and conflict education that other people in the profession are doing, and it's such a relief to me. Like yes, this is what I love the most and this is my focus, but goodness gracious, is it nice to not have to do it all,
You have
because
to do it
there's so
all.
much of it that has to happen for us to move forward as a profession. So yeah.
I love it. And it puts a burden off of you when you are
Yeah.
not the smartest person in the room. Well, I don't have to do it all, right? I don't have to do the lift. I'll just do my part the best I can. I'll do my part.
Yeah.
And then I'll absorb what other people have to say, and be
Yeah.
excited about what other people have to say. I used to laugh and say, well, when I was 15, I knew everything. And now that I'm over 60, I know nothing.
It's a
Realize how little
relief.
you actually do know. Yeah.
In some ways, it's a relief to not have to know everything,
Yeah,
for
it
sure.
is.
Gosh,
It is. There's
don't want to go back
resources
to
out
that.
there too, and people like Cyndie that you can reach out
Right.
to and go, help me. Here's what's
Yeah.
going
Yeah,
on.
you don't have to to solve every conflict with your team alone. Like
Do
there are
not.
folks like us out there that can help you. So
Do
reach
not.
out for help.
One of the things I do want to talk about, because this is something that we did, I attended your class a couple of years ago at
Mhm.
AVMA, and you talked about feeding forward instead of
Oh, I
feed
love
back.
feed
Remember
forward.
that? So
Yep.
this was just such a good thing. And 2 years into it, I still think about what you said to me, and it still works. So my conundrum to you was, I want to do everything. Everything is interesting to me, and I cannot possibly physically do it all. And you, so feed forward to me. So Cyndie, you looked at me and you said, whenever these things come up, you have to prioritize and say, does this feed my journey? Is this my path? Is this the thing that is my life's focus? And if it's not, then you have to graciously say, that sounds wonderful, but I can't do that. And it really has helped me because, when you get out in the world and you've been out into it as long as I have, and I'm sure this happens to you too, people just call you out of the blue and they just want you to do all kinds of really cool stuff. But you are a person and you can only do so much. And so you have to
True.
figure out where your sweet spot is and live in that spot. And not to say you're stuck there forever, because if there's something else interesting that comes along, but you might have to give up something over here to go and take on this new challenge. But I wanted to appreciate that and let you know that just that little 5 minutes in the end of a class at AVMA had an effect on my decision making for the last couple of years. So thank
Well,
you.
I'm so glad, Deb. And should I give a brief intro to Feed
Yes,
Forward for those who
please
are listening?
do.
So
Yeah.
so the talk was a little bit about, how do we take difficult feedback, I believe. And so we were talking about how we don't always have to wait to get feedback, or we don't have to always solicit information about how we've performed in the past. If we know that there's a way that we want to improve or things that are important to us, we can actually actively solicit what Marshall Goldsmith calls feed forward. So that's where the idea comes from, which is this idea that we just go to people and we say, hey, I'm trying to get better at, in the classic example I tend to use, and I've gotten so much, like, again, great little tidbits over time about mine is usually, how can I be a better listener, right? And just asking people for one or two pieces of suggestions, and being very neutral with the kind of response to that. So just say thank you. Don't go over the top. Don't go like, oh, I've already tried that. So that you're likely to continue to get feed forward in the future. And some of the recommendations you get might be things you've already thought of. And that's okay, because then when you implement them, you can say, like, hey, I did try that and it worked great. And then they have buy-in into what you're doing. And you also tend to get some suggestions that you maybe didn't think of before. And so it's a really great tool to use for really anybody in an organization to think about what they're trying to go for and to really take proactive action toward getting there.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I love it because it's such a positive thing to do. And it is not waiting for someone to hopefully give you some feedback on things that you need to know. So many times is we are conflict avoidance as humans. That's just our normal. But we have people who are, maybe doing something that is not quite up to par, and we never tell them. And we stew about it and get so upset. And then all of a sudden, one day we just blow up and nail
Right.
it to the cross. And the people are like, I don't even know what's going on
Where
here.
did that come from?
Where did that come from? But it's been building for months, all because we didn't step into it the very
Yeah.
first time it happened. So it's so unfair. I people say, "Oh, I don't want to be mean. I don't want to be the bad boss. I don't." But it is so incredibly unfair to do that to people if you are in a leadership position, because it is your job to grow people.
Yeah.
And they cannot grow if they don't know. And they're just assuming as they go along everything's just spiffy until one day you come up and just, melt them to the ground. So let's just take a moment and say the job of a leader is a coach
Mhm.
and to improve people. And you have to, thinking about football coaches on the sidelines, they're constantly going over to a player and, doing this, and telling them what to do next. And the players nod and they go back on the field and they make a change and they do it better that next time. So when we look at it as, I'm not fussing at people, I'm not being mean to people, I am their coach. I am teaching them how to be all that they can be
Yeah.
in this practice and improving, their work performance, and hopefully even improving them to the point they even go out the door.
Right.
Because in my career, and I've been doing this 40 years, and I love looking at the managers that I've coached that have become CVPMs. I just had one reach out to me on Facebook and LinkedIn that said, "You encouraged me and I just passed my CVPM. You sent me a private note." I went, "This is great. I just love this stuff." And the 9+ kids that worked for us while they were going to vet school that not only went out and became veterinarians, but owned practices and successful practices. Did they work for us the rest of their lives? No, they didn't. They went out into the world and did it, right. And I think that is so, so important. So Cyndie, and we obviously met in a very odd way.
Of course.
However, tell me about the value you see in networking, because I feel that's something else that is involved in growing people, is helping them understand the value of building a network.
Yeah. Yeah. So, gosh, I have so many thoughts about this. So I see so many opportunities for us to get to know folks. I was talking with one of Joss Weisman's associates, and she was talking about how sometimes we have single serving friends. And so every interaction, whether or not that's going to be a long-term connection or it's just going to be a short-term connection, again, I think it's that humility that we always have something to learn from someone. And while sometimes that's going to be a connection that results in a job or results in work that you can do later on, and certainly sometimes that's happened for me. I was heavily involved in the VBMA when I was in vet school. And that led to a ton of different connections as I came up in the profession. And honestly, my life would legitimately not be what it is. Like, I ended up meeting my husband because I had an internship at Hills, and he was living in the town that I was staying in. Like, he was not at all related to the vet profession, but I would not be in Kansas. I would not have met my husband if it were not for, some of that network. So you never know where that network is going to play a role. And increasingly, as I get further into the profession, I have really, really loved the role of mentorship in networking. So being able to kind of pay forward the benefits that networking has had for me, and being able to connect with others, and recognizing that mutual benefit that so much mentorship has really had. I've been fortunate enough to be involved with Addie Reinhardt's Mentor Vet, both as a facilitator as well as one of the Mentor Vet Connect mentors through the AVMA. And those relationships just have been so rewarding, sometimes for the mentee, but also for me. I've also found a couple just colleagues. I had a friend who was talking recently about a community of practice. And so talking about who are those people who are kind of doing work that's similar to what we're doing, that we can kind of share in that community and collaboration, hopefully, again, without creating any monopolies or sketchy things like that. But lately, I've been doing a lot of body doubling as somebody who does my consulting work from home. I am still in practice part-time as well. But on those days that I'm doing work from home, we literally will set up a Zoom meeting, and we'll be talking, we'll be doing our work silently, and we just know somebody else is there to help us be accountable to getting that work done. And so I have been very interested to see how networking can work in ways I didn't necessarily think of when I was a vet student.
Mhm.
And that there are these other ways that we can connect one another. I also have really come to enjoy connecting other people. So I think when I was younger, it was about being connected. And as I get older, it's about the joy of being able to connect people and being able to say, like, you do this, I bet you would really love meeting this person. Or like you were talking about those experiences where, somebody comes to you with an offer and you're like, hey, that doesn't fit into the things that I'm doing right now, but who would be a really good fit? I think this person is doing work that's really interesting and might be a perfect fit
Mhm.
for what you're doing right now.
Mhm.
So yeah, those are the ways I'm finding networking really interesting and really rewarding lately.
Yeah. I read not too long ago that we are in an era of loneliness.
Yeah.
And I feel like that developing that network is so good for your well-being and mental health. And that it just, and this profession is unique. And I think everybody thinks their profession is unique, but veterinary medicine is really unique, because I've been in other professions, and I'm telling you, this is a different group of folks. So having somebody that can speak the language that you speak and understand the struggles that you live in, even I mean, you might not be doing it anymore on a day-to-day basis, but you've been there and you've done that. I
Yeah.
think that's extremely helpful to be able to talk to people. And for me, it's also fascinating because there's so many different aspects of veterinary medicine now. We used to be kind of just tunnel vision, small animal, large animal, this is what you did. But now we have veterinarians who are, exotics only, but we have veterinarians who are also, tech services veterinarians. And we have even technicians who have started businesses teaching technicians how to be um, uh, solo practitioners out in the world to go and help clients with their pets medications and stuff outside of a veterinary hospital. And that's just a few of the things that I can think of off the
Yeah.
top of my head. And then you've got the whole group that went into technology that's building all kinds of really cool stuff for us to use in practice that we were like, wow, this is so neat. I can actually leverage this technology and then I'll have more time to do the things I really love to do in practice. So there's just so much interesting stuff out there in the world. And I know that, working in practice, somebody asked me the other day what I had an opinion about a company. And I said, look, I live in industry, so I'm reading all this stuff and I know I'm having awareness of what's happening and who got fined by the FDA and all this kind of stuff. But I would say that the managers are just grinding it out every day. And many of the practitioners are doing the same thing. They're not really aware of
Yeah.
all this stuff. But I would encourage people to step outside their comfort zone and look at some of the new things that are coming down the pike because your lives can be so much better with just a few minor changes and a minimal investment in some of this new technology that just dictation alone
Yeah.
the AI dictation alone is saving an average of 2.5 hours a day of doctor time. So
Yeah.
they actually get to go home and have
Yeah.
a life and see their kids and all the good things. So
And that in terms of conflict prevention too, like when you have, that good quality of life and yet you can eat and you can sleep and you can have your social time at home, like that in and of itself is great conflict prevention.
exactly, it is. People are. I've laughed at because I talked about. I actually was talking to Ernie Ward one day on an airplane and went, we have all these guidelines. We should have guidelines for physical well-being in practice because it is a really hard physical job, especially if you're a technician and you're up and down off the floor all the time. And we should pay attention to them. We should invest in tools that help us not have to physically lift things and to, not, do the fear-free things so we're not getting jerked around by animals and all those kind of things. Because when you are in pain, you are also emotionally wrought. And it's hard to be nice when you hurt.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is this
Yep.
another component to mental well-being is the physical. You cannot separate your body and your mind as much as you think you can.
I think about conflict in the same way that we think about kind of this threshold level of itching or seizures, right? The more needs that we have that are piling up, the more I think we're likely to hit a threshold where that erupts into conflict, right? So if we're in pain and it's Friday and we're tired and we're hungry, and then we also have something not going according to plan, we're a lot more likely for that to blow up in a way we didn't want or expect than if it was just one of those things, right?
Yeah,
So, yeah.
the
Yeah.
pylon. So Cyndie, tell me what advice you'd give somebody facing like a big career decision. I mean, you've come from the BMA, you've done
Yeah.
Hills, you've done consulting, you've worked in practice.
Yep.
Um, there's a lot of decisions. I mean, you moved to Kansas. There's
Yep.
a lot
Yep.
of stuff, right? A lot of stuff.
Oh.
Um, Looking back on the things that how you've made your choices, what advice would you give somebody in choosing?
Yeah, well, and I think there's kind of this idea that a choice is irreversible. And in some ways, I want to remind folks that there are a lot of opportunities sometimes to dip your toe in the water and to try something and to see if you like it. We hear a decent amount. So I'm in a GAIN group for veterinarians that's government, academic, industry, and non-clinical practice. And so we hear a lot of folks who say, hey, I want to leave clinical practice, but they don't necessarily know what they want to move toward. And that's really it's hard to position yourself in a different way if you don't know what you're going toward. And so in my early years, I thought that I was going to look like a crazy person because I was doing so many different things. I taught for a semester at a vet tech program at a community college. Got roped into that just because I called them and said, like, hey, I'd love to do a vet tech appreciation week speech. And they were like, hey, you want to teach a whole course? Um, I ended up doing some tech services for Nationwide. I ended up, doing some marketing writing for Clinicians Brief. So, but I am still in practice part-time. Like I still love my clients. I still love doing that. And as my consulting business has grown, I've been doing less and less of all of the other things that I've tried. Um, because that is it ultimately at this point it is self-sustaining at this point. So financially I could do that exclusively. I choose not to at this point. But that idea that when you bend, you don't have to break, you don't have to cut things off. You can start trying something, see if it's a good fit for you, see if you like it, and you can move progressively into doing more and more of that in a lot of different areas of vet medicine. So if you're interested in doing shelter medicine, start talking to people there. See if you want to start volunteering one day a week. See what you can try first before you take the plunge. I mean, certainly if you're sure, go for it, but that's
Yeah.
not a requirement.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I started consulting probably 3 years before I actually started my consulting practice.
Yeah.
And you're right, it was a toe in the water. Novartis was asking me to do a little of this, a little of that. I went, yeah, sure, why
Mhm.
not? And found out that I enjoyed it a lot. And
Yeah.
it was funny because I think about my business card when I first started, I had on the back of it all these different things that I could do. And part of it was like cornerstone advisory and financial stuff and marketing stuff. And now I think I've eliminated a lot of the things that I can do, but I don't really love doing. And it's so
Yeah.
much more focused on the things that I feel like I am absolutely the best at. And that's a progression of your career. And you get to the
Yeah.
point where you're, known for certain things, just like you're known for your conflict and the jerk research stuff that you do. I kind of feel like I'm known for the client service and communication side, especially for the front desk stuff. And that's great because if that's your sweet spot, if that's what you love, then yeah, try to figure out how to do more of that. And
Yeah.
that's quite all right. Absolutely.
Exactly.
All
But
right.
you won't know till you try.
That's exactly right. Well, I really have enjoyed our conversation. I always do enjoy our
Of course.
conversations. And I'll ask you, is there anything that you would like to tell the audience about yourself or your company or how to reach out? Or I always like the recommendation of a favorite book. I have ridiculous
Oh,
amount
yes.
of to be read books on
Oh
my
my
list.
gosh. Right. Well, so yes, I would please feel free to reach out. I generally will do kind of 15-minute free consults for folks to kind of start and just get an idea of if I might be able to be of help for folks, especially for employees who are kind of in a difficult spot. To that end, probably one of my favorite books for folks who feel stuck is a book called The A-Hole Survival Guide. It's great for helping you reassess whether or not you're really as stuck as you think you are, and if you are genuinely stuck, what you can do to help with that. And I would ask people to stay tuned. I'm trying to put together a gift basket folks can get if they have friends who are stuck in a difficult workplace. It's a you hate your job gift basket to help you get through. So we're gonna have some fun things in there, like both that book as well as water bottle snacks, but also some fun little notebooks, like things I can't say at work because otherwise I'll get fired. A candle that says I only had this is my last F to give. Oh, look, it's on fire. That kind of stuff. So
Uh-huh. Oh, I
I'll
love
have more
that.
coming down the bend. But I'm pretty active on Instagram and my website. Those are the two best places to find me.
Fantastic. And we will put all this information in the show notes along with Cyndie's picture and bio. And once again, I really appreciate the time that you shared with us today. It's always an enlightening conversation. And between the two of us, we could talk about this stuff for hours
Oh
and
my gosh.
hours. Um,
Maybe we'll have to do another one sometime
Maybe
and
we will.
have a more focused topic. Yeah.
Exactly right. All right. So thank you all. And thank you very much for listening to today's episode of The Bend with Dr. Cyndie Courtney.